Hello and welcome to Is It Canadian, the series where I tell you if your favorite store is actually Canadian owned. This episode, A&W, and buckle in, this one's a little complicated. So back in the late 1910s, an American hotel owner named Roy Allen met a chemist who said he'd created this really nice drink called root beer. Allen bought the recipe and it became so popular he hired a guy named Frank Wright to help him sell it, and in 1920 eventually they opened a couple of restaurants in California. Allen and Wright, A&W. The root beer was a hit, partially because of the taste, but also remember back then it was Prohibition. So having the word beer in the name of the product, it kind of made those two guys like early edgelords. It was a franchise business from the start, mostly to keep the root beer recipe away from the restaurant owners. All the franchisees did was order the syrup, they didn't know how to actually make it. A&W started adding food like sandwiches, not burgers yet, and grew, and they sold the root beer business off to some guy in 1950. Now in 1956, that's when they started expanding into Canada. First Winnipeg, then Montreal. It was still owned by Americans, though that ownership changed a bunch of times to a fruit conglomerate, then some other big company, then another one. Always Americans, though. And by the mid-1970s, A&W had more restaurants than McDonald's. Then in 1972, Unilever, yes, that Unilever, bought all the Canadian restaurants. They got a bunch of the franchise owners to act as the management group, and 22 years later, in the mid-1990s, Unilever sold the Canadian operations to that management group, all Canadian franchise owners. But here's where it gets complicated, but we're close, so bear with me. While those guys privately owned the company, they also set up a publicly traded trust on the Toronto Stock Exchange that held the value of A&W's trademarks. Those trademarks were licensed back to the restaurant owners, and that trust collected 3% of the sales for the trouble. Then, just a few months ago, that trademark trust was folded into the main company, which began trading on the TSE as the main A&W. And because part of it is publicly held, we can't be sure how much of the company is owned by Canadians. But we can get close. This new entity, almost 60% of it is held by the same people who owned the main management company. At least it did when they first launched. And of the other 40% that was public, we know that Torquest Partners, a Canadian private equity firm, initially owned about 20% of the new company's shares. So most of the ownership is still Canadian, but probably not all of it. Now, it is still headquartered in Canada, North Vancouver to be precise, and Canada has good beef and chicken and potato suppliers, so most of its supply chain comes from Canada and, all the employees and so on. And there's still franchises, mostly owned, we can assume, by locals. Oh, and you can buy one too if you want. It costs about $700,000. So is the A&W in your town Canadian? Mostly? Probably? 7 out of 10 Bannocks. Follow me because next up are Boston Pizza, Lululemon, McCain Foods, and Canadian Tire. Are any of them actually Canadian owned? You will be surprised. Tell me in the comments what other store you think I should do next. Follow me on Blue Sky and Twitch, and here is your Daily Otis.